Welcome everybody to this lecture that is being telecast on CEC Gurukul. In today's lecture, we would be discussing about the topic situating women in history. As we had discussed in our preceding lectures, we are going to focus on the very important role that has been played by women in history, but something which has not really been accounted for. Here, I would like to point out a dichotomy that exists in the field of history writing, as was pointed out by Gerda Lerner in 1986. As Gerda Lerner commented, women have a history and women are in history. They are and they always have been actors and agents in history. Women have made history, yet they don't know their history. So what a dichotomy it is, that while history has always been part of women's lives and women have actively participated as men have actively participated, as all the agents have actively participated in making and unmaking of history, but sadly their experiences have not really been counted for. So therefore, what are the objectives of women's history that I am going to talk about today? One is to evolve a methodology of exploring women's history by analyzing the category of gender. And also, secondly, one can say to study diverse themes like family, folklore, household, everyday experiences, etc., and not remain limited to the meta narratives, related to politics, related to military history, related to wars, etc. Then here there is a question that emerges, that is the idea of men's history universally human, and the answer is definitely no. Unless and until women's experiences are also counted, it cannot be a universal human history. And universal histories largely reflect male interests, concerns, experiences, ideas, achievements. So therefore, the female experience, which is related to probably domesticity, which is related to everyday life experiences, which is related to family life, related to matrilineity, all these are sadly ignored. So therefore, one needs to critically analyze the evolution of an ideology as well as the social relations and several other institutions that lead to female subordination. So therefore, the core strategy that that feminist historians or those who are writing on women as active agents of history, their sole aim is to project women as active agents of history and not as passive agents. So therefore, we are going to talk about women as makers of history. And as I start discussing this theme further, there is a need to go back into the history of this movement. So the feminist movement of the 1960s and the development of women's studies is a very important factor that has played a very important role in providing what we call today as women's history. Then the traditional historiography, which largely focused on documenting facts where men were dominant, like war, diplomacy, politics, commerce, trade, all these had a very myopic view as far as women participation was concerned, and the largely neglected themes like agriculture, animal husbandry, family, ritual, folk art, household work, all these were regarded as not very important. They were regarded as frivolous and so outside the scope of serious history. So what was serious history was obviously male oriented, and as has been pointed out by Scott in 1986, though women, like men, have been actors and agents in history, their experiences and actions are not recorded, and this had been the trend not only in Indian history but also in Western history, something that was taken note of by several scholars. So therefore, what emerges is a discussion on women as a category, and here one cannot really make a generalized statement about women as belonging to a particular category. That would also be a wrong way of looking at gender and history, because women ought to be considered as a social group rather than a biological category which has undergone distinct legal, political and social experiences over a period of time. Now, another very important categorization that needs to be incorporated when one is talking about gender and history is that gender, like any other category, for example, caste, class, religion, or race, has been a very decisive factor in history. So therefore, when we are talking about women or when we are talking about gender, we need to incorporate in our discussion the prism of caste, class, region, religion, race, and so many other categories that one can think of, because these social forces of caste, class, language, region, religion must not be neglected. The opportunities and the limitations that are available to individual women depend a lot on these different social forces and several divisions that exist in any society, and particularly this is true of Indian society, which has been and which is still a highly caste divided society. So therefore, these divisions must be accounted for, and one cannot really take them lightly, and one need not attempt any kind of generalization when one is talking about gender and history. Here another interesting statement that was made by Emma Tarlow in 1996. To write a history of women means to assert power, to challenge authority at various levels of society. So therefore, when one is talking about gender and history, it also means that we are kind of questioning, we are kind of challenging the authority that had been reinforced time and again till date. And so therefore, there is a need to deconstruct history writing, there is a need to attempt a revisionist approach to history writing. Now this does not mean that we would kind of discover or invent new kind of sources. That is just not possible. The sources are very much there. What we need to do is to develop the right kind of lens to look at those sources once again and kind of scrutinize those sources from a gender lens, so that newer facts and figures emerge, and then on the basis of those facts one can attempt a reinterpretation of the past. Now, going back still further, I would like to talk about Mary Wollstonecraft's book, which is a very important and interesting reading, that is A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. This work came out in 1792. And in this work, a very important statement that Mary Wollstonecraft made was that the divine right of husbands, like the divine right of kings, may, it is hoped, in this enlightened age be contested without danger. Now, you all must realize that this work was being written in the background of French Revolution, and French Revolution, with its slogan of equality, liberty, fraternity, it kind of challenged the old social order, the old political order, and the new kind of order that it championed also raised the hopes of women, active as active participants in history making. And so Wollstonecraft raised this issue that if one can challenge the divine right of kings, and one can ask for representation by people and the rights of people, then why not challenge the divine rights of husbands also, who since eternity have claimed this right over their wives. Then another interesting statement that was made was that I do not wish to have power over men but over themselves. And this is the very essence of feminist discourse, that it is not important for women to control men in any way, because that would be equally wrong. And what is important is to have power over themselves, over the essence of being a woman, and to exercise that female agency, and in due course of time, if it entailed that you have to challenge the preceding order that had kind of facilitated male authority, then so be it. So one can definitely say that Mary Wollstonecraft from 1759 to 1797 was definitely a founder of modern feminism, and those contributions are worth talking about. Now, historians have considered The Rights of Women perhaps the most original book of its century, and the French Revolution, with all its revolutionary ideas, definitely played a very important role in shaping the entire discourse. So for the first time, a woman dared to sit down to write a book which was not an echo of men's thinking, but it was the exploration of the problems of society and morals from a standpoint which recognized humanity. So this was no mean achievement, especially if you are thinking in terms of 18th century, end of 18th century, when there was so much of turmoil, so much of so many incidents happening, political changes, revolutions taking place. So it definitely gave women some power to rethink about the kind of lives that they have had, and so this explains that kind of a work. Then one can also talk about Elizabeth Stanton from 1815 to 1902, who has been considered as a founder of women's suffrage movement in the US. So basically the struggle for voting rights, and this was a long drawn out struggle which began in US, and Stanton played a very important role in carrying forward this movement. And as per a declaration of sentiments which Stanton championed in 1848, the statement that was made was that the history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and assumptions on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. So this very identification of the tyrannical power that kind of existed, that had existed, was very important, and it made women realize that how they needed to be politically active, they needed their rights, and it would be a kind of an injustice if they were not given the same voting rights as men. So therefore, the political electoral democracies began to appear in the world only with the extension of political rights to women in the early 20th century. And soon there were a series of working class movements, labor movements, the emergence of socialist parties in various European countries, which played a key role in the struggle for women's rights. So it was not as if women were fighting their struggle on their own, and it was not as if there were no men who who were kind of supportive, or they were kind of radical and liberal in their ideas. So it was definitely a joint struggle, and the labor movements as well as the various socialist parties played very important role in carrying forward this struggle. Then another important personality one can talk about was Clara Zetkin, 1857 to 1933. She was a German socialist feminist. And she also was very instrumental in raising the demands for women's rights, suffrage movement, political representation. And as you can see, this visual regarding women's suffrage march that took place in New York in May 1913. So how women participated in this march, and they were even carrying their babies, toddlers along, and it was some kind of a making of a statement that now there was no holding back women in name of domesticity or in name of motherhood, and they were out on streets demanding for their rights. So once this suffrage or right to vote in the USA, this movement when it started, it also had a long history. So while in 1776 it was only the landed gentry, especially white men, who were over 21 years of age and who owned real estate, they had been given the right to vote in 1776. However, women, after a long struggle which continued for several decades, ultimately got this right in after 1920. And then there were some other countries also where gradually this right was given, like in UK it was in 1928, and in Canada around mid 1920s in all the provinces. So therefore, this political struggle kind of created an essential background for challenging the old power narrative. And as one talks about the 20th century revolutions, the very core strategy that was adopted during these revolutions was the granting women the right to vote, which happened in several other European countries. And when one talks about Russia, a very important movement was a women's demonstration, again demanding voting rights. And this, as you can see again in this visual, in this March of 1917 in Russia, women demanded universal voting rights. And it was not as if only men had the authority or only men should have the authority to demand political rights. Then a Russian revolutionary and a feminist leader, Larisa Reisner, also played a very important role, and she was quite active till 1926. Now, as a result of all these movements and all these struggles, change started coming about in a traditional Russian society also. So there was civil marriage registration which started in Russia from 1920s, which kind of supported the rights of women within the domestic sphere also. And a very interesting poster that one can refer to was a Soviet poster of 1920s, which mentioned down with kitchen slavery. So ultimately women were realizing that how they were slaves in kitchen, and how the Russian nation, it was taking pride in being a liberal country, in being a revolutionary country, in having socialism, but how its women were slogging hard in kitchen, and so they just simply refused to perform those kitchen related duties without being given proper recognition and without expecting equal participation from other members of the family. So this was definitely a welcome change that had started coming about. Then another interesting development in Russian society was that women were now no longer only going to play the role of educated professionals, or they were challenging their kitchen related duties, but they were also ready to go on the front and to fight wars. So they were ready to don the uniform of a soldier, as you can see on the screen, that how Russian women were projected as strong women who were out there ready to fight wars along with men, and also helping them out not only in the field of medicine but also in combat. So a Soviet woman in the war could be identified as playing very important role as pilots. So therefore you see that with time there was a change that was coming about in the wider world, and the same change is coming now in Indian society also. Now, since our lecture is more focused on the approaches to women's history, so coming back to the theme, now I would be telling you about what are the different approaches if one has to attempt women's history writing, or if one has to incorporate gender and history as part of one's research. So one is the editive history, which is a history that was written after a re-examination of the sources to uncover the role of women. So therefore one needed to go back to the kind of sources that were available and then review them. Then there is the concept of genderized history, which means to question historiography and then highlight the gender differences as a key to the analysis of social relations. So in any kind of discourse on genderized history, the focus has to be on the analysis of social relations, that is the relations between the rich and the poor, upper caste, lower caste, haves and have-nots, and so on and so forth. And then one can talk about the contributory history, which focuses on the issue of female agency, while also recognizing patriarchy, how it regulated the behavior of women and why they behaved in certain ways. And then one can talk about a more balanced approach, which is known as a total history. This approach explores integrated history, that is both men and women equally contribute to making of history. So gender history in no way means that you are going to neglect the part played by 50% of the population, that is men. So their experiences along with the experiences of women would amount to what one can call as total history. Then coming to the idea of mapping the feminine domain. This again incorporates the view that the past did not cater to marginalized women. So when we talk about a special category of women like the elite women or the queens, their experiences are still counted. There is still some references to such elitist women, whereas marginalized women like prostitutes, courtesans, tawayefs, devdasis, or those belonging to the marginalized sections of society, the Shudra women, they continue to be social and political outcasts, therefore justifying overarching patriarchy. So therefore one needs to also look into methods of engendering history. Now we have pointed out what all limitations have been there, but now what do we need to do to bridge this gap? Firstly, I would like to make a point that no single methodological and conceptual framework can fix the complexities of historical understanding. So one needs to have a multiple kind of approaches, And also, as has been pointed out by Gerda Lerner in 1979, it is important to incorporate experiences of all women to construct a new women's history. So, a new women's history cannot be a history only of outstanding females or of those who were achievers in some way or another. One also need to talk about ordinary women, ordinary men, marginalized sections of society, and also talk about the day-to-day, everyday experiences, because that is what constituted life of an ordinary female. Even the existing sources, chronicles, literature, as well as archival data can be utilized to rewrite history, but the historian needs to read in between the lines. Only then there can be a recreation of past from gender point of view. So, this gender perspective, if applied on the existing source material, can be very helpful. And what do you mean by gender perspective? It basically means questioning generalizations. So, don't let history become a master discourse or a meta narrative. And once history becomes a master discourse or it becomes a meta narrative, then there are bound to be problems. And so, therefore, now some interesting changes have started appearing, as one can talk about Anila Varghese, who conducted a study in 2000, and she attempted to study about the dress and other aspects of women's life during the Vijayanagar Empire, and how these ordinary aspects of a woman's life influenced the Zenana architecture of Vijayanagar Empire. So, this was a very interesting study which was conducted, which was something different from the traditional kind of history writing which talks about the meta narrative. Then you can see in this visual the Royal Darbar of 19th century. Now, this again can be utilized as a source of history writing. Photographs are very important and pertinent sources of history writing, and you can see that how during 19th century there was complete absence of women in any kind of representation related to darbar or court politics. So, these are all men, and they are wielding some kind of weapon or an instrument in their hand, and there is hardly any woman to be seen in this visual. So, these were some of the visuals as well as descriptions that I shared with you. I hope you would like to incorporate some of these informations as you would proceed with your history writing, history thinking, and strategizing about research. Thank you.